thank you for coming to my talk today titled Gone Tishing. It's about abusing Microsoft Teams misconfigurations for webhook hijacking and other shenanigans. So let's get started. A little bit about me. My name's Jessa. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a red teamer in healthcare. I do primarily pen testing for web apps and APIs, but I'm also into offensive cloud security and IoT. Specifically for IoT, I dive into medical devices and other things. I'm also really into DEF CON badge life. So when I talk about IoT, that's a little bit of it. In my free time, I'm a yoga instructor and runner, and I'm also a dog parent. So since I'm bringing up my dog, I want to show a picture of him. And if you like my talk today, please give me a follow on Twitter or follow me on LinkedIn. For the agenda, we're going to talk about the background first, what parts of Microsoft Teams cause this vulnerability, specifically the connectors functionality and the webhooks, and how they're integrated together to cause this vulnerability, and then getting specific into what the vulnerability is, and then how we can exploit it by hijacking the webhook and then creating a phishing credential harvester page and sending it within a internal Teams channel. And then we're going to talk about detection and prevention and how your company can spot phishing messages like this and how it can be prevented in the first place. And then kind of going into a conclusion of why do a Teams message phishing engagement versus your standard phishing email to test your employees' security awareness. So on the screen here is a Teams connector. Teams connectors are a functionality within Teams that allow you to integrate third-party applications into your Teams environment. This is very commonly used for developers when they want to send notifications from like GitHub or ServiceNow in real time into their Teams channel to let their team know, hey, something was pushed to GitHub or a service is down. So to provide that real-time data notifications quickly and easily. To the left here, you'll see just an example of how you can access those connectors within a test Teams channel. And then to the right are just different options. So there's the webhooks, but then there's so many different things that can be integrated via a Teams connector. So these Teams connectors utilize something called webhooks. And webhooks are primarily what we're going to be talking about today. So these webhooks are kind of like secret tokens that when you set up a connector to communicate with something like GitHub or ServiceNow, these webhooks basically tell GitHub or the third-party application that you're communicating with that specific channel. So once you have that webhook, you're basically in, and there's no other authentication for it. So the more formal definition would be it's a user-defined HTTP callback that communicates real-time data into Teams. So like I said before, if someone pushed to GitHub, that would send that push right into Teams so the development team will know. And then it allows external web surfaces to interact with channels. So again, like what I said before, it allows these applications to communicate within Teams with no other authentication. And then popular use cases would be developer system teams for maintenance notifications with third-party applications like Jenkins, Bitbucket, or ServiceNow. So on the screen here is just an example of a configured webhook connector within Teams. So it says third-party notification, but this can be any application you'd like to integrate it with, and then you can add an image. But the really interesting thing here is the view webhook link. Obviously, I blocked it out, but this would be the bread and butter here. So the view webhook here, you would go in and view it, and then you can steal it and do some fun things with it. So what would be the vulnerability here? Who can give me any ideas? No, the answer's in the meme. Yes, default configurations, awesome, good job. So in Microsoft Teams, there's the default configuration that anyone can view these webhooks as long as they're in the Teams environment. So say there's a development channel and they're sending GitHub notifications that they're I don't know, they're working on like a last-minute prod application, and people are clicking these links to take them to GitHub so they can view whatever changes are being made. As long as I have access to that company's teams, I'm actually able to view that in the configured webhook, so I can go in and view that token, even if I'm someone who's not a developer, not part of that team. And right here is just a GIF of how you can go in and steal that webhook. So I'll wait till it starts again to kind of talk through it. But yeah, basically going into any test channel with configured webhooks and then scrolling down, clicking managed, and then they can just scroll down and steal the URL. I did not include the token in this screenshot, but if you want to see a full page of what this would look like, going back to the slide 6 that I kind of showed before would be the full page of what it would look like. So now I stole the token. So now what can I do? So for this instance, I decided to make a credential harvester from the token I stole in hopes that I could steal more credentials from a company. And how I first did this is I used Postman, and where that hijacked webhook text was where I put the token. So when I put the token into that post, that sent it directly into Teams without any of the authentication, like what I said before. And then I created a card that was basically the outline for the message I wanted to send into Teams. A really fun fact is Microsoft provides tons of templates within their documentation, so it's super easy to copy and paste this, and that's what developers sometimes do. And then I created a phishing landing page. So that little red box is where I put it, and I'm going to go into a little bit about how I created that next. But then the lower screenshot is just how it looked like within Teams. And then you'll notice that there's no notification that it's coming from an external source. There's no flags. So if I was a developer, I would look at it and just think it was like any other notification, and then I'd click it. And then the card I designed was a ServiceNow notification. So then this is an example of how the credential harvester looked like. So I decided to go with a Microsoft sign-in page. So pretty simple. A really cool thing about this instance was, since a lot of companies use SSO, once they submit these credentials into a fake landing page, it actually redirects them to the legitimate application that they wanted to access. So that decreases detection. How I created this is I used an open source project called GoFish. GoFish is really awesome. It's for phishing engagements. And originally, when I did it, it was for specifically for email phishing, but since it was open source, I was able to go in and configure it to fit my needs. GoFish is really cool because it allows you to create and design the landing page pretty easily, and it also tracks the data of the people how many people would click the link, who submitted credentials, and then if you want to, it actually shows what the credentials were. I would not recommend doing that because it does save it in clear text, so if you're doing this in a company environment, you probably do not want to be saving credentials in clear text. But yeah, I also configured it to show me IPs, so even if an employee didn't submit their credentials, they just clicked the link, I was still able to figure out who that employee was based on the IP they submitted, which was pretty cool. So after finding a successful attack vector for phishing, now what do? I wait. So since these were messages that were being sent in real time, there was a lot being sent pretty frequently, so it's pretty hard if there's multiple messages if you just send one to get a lot of data back. So you kind of have to send the message and see what type of response you get. So for this instance, I sent the first message that looked exactly like a notification. Didn't get too much feedback, so I sent it again, and then seeing what the feedback I got was, and then maybe sending it at an odd time, and then eventually I added misspellings to get people to kind of pick up on what was going on. But that's a really cool thing about these type of engagements is you can kind of interact with your developers and other channel members that you're trying to phish based on their behavior. And then just getting into attack solutions to stop this from getting worse or stop a huge phishing issue at your company. To just getting into the detection, it's very similar to a phishing email. So in phishing emails, they usually tell employees to look for misspellings or check the certificate or check the domain where the link is sending them to see if it's legitimate. So the detection is very, very similar. But then getting into prevention, teaching your employees that phishing doesn't just happen in email, it can happen in texts, it can happen in calls, and it can happen in Microsoft Teams. A lot of employees that may not have that security awareness wouldn't expect Teams to be something like this to happen in Teams. So just letting them know that this can definitely happen. And then also including a see something, say something protocol at your company. So usually in a phishing email situation, it's really easy to report that message. But then if creating this type of reporting would allow your employee to tell the security company or the security team pretty easily if they do see something that's suspicious. And that would just allow them to respond quicker and more efficiently to an issue. And then also watching for misconfigurations. This was a default configuration that wasn't thought about, so it could have been prevented altogether if the person who configured Teams just made sure that there was only the right people who needed to see this could see it. So thinking about that element of least privilege here, that maybe someone from a whole different team doesn't need to see the ServiceNow or maintenance channel configurations. And then finally, just kind of getting into the differences between doing an email, Outlook, phishing engagement versus a Teams phishing engagement. So just some similarities. The messages do look similar, like what I said before, the types of detection. And then both can be used for security awareness within your company. But then some differences. To do a phishing engagement within Outlook, all you really need is the email domain. So all an attacker really needs to know is it like first name, last name at company.com or first name dot last name? That's really all they need to know to send a phishing email. But for Teams, it's a little more complicated. They do need to have stolen credentials to get into the Teams environment. And then also detection is really a little bit different for email versus Teams. So Outlook actually notifies someone when they receive an email from an external source. So it makes it a lot easier to be like, hey, this looks kind of weird. But Teams, it doesn't at all. And this is especially true if you create a landing page with a certificate to avoid any of those browser warnings that might come up when they click the link. And then for Teams phishing, its detection can be a lot less likely, especially in scenarios where a lot of notifications are being sent to one channel, so keeping that in mind. And it usually takes a lot longer because you do have to find the configuration and then create the message and then create the phishing page. So there's a little bit more of a setup that goes into a Teams messaging phishing engagement for your company. And then just getting into why get creative with a red team phishing engagement in the first place. You do get to find other vulnerabilities. So again, for this instance, we did get to find that misconfiguration, which was super interesting. That was just open. You do get to test unconventional reporting procedures. So you get to test, hey, if an employee sees something that's kind of weird, how would they tell the security team, and how would it be fixed? So you do get to test those elements of your security at your company. And then you also get to learn more about potential open source tools. So I got to do the research to find what GoPhish was and how to customize it to fit my needs. And I did get to learn a lot more about Postman and writing those writing that message call into Teams. And then you also just get to challenge your red team. So say if your red team's done with their tests for the year and if they're looking for something to do, this is a really great opportunity for them to give them an opportunity to learn and then also kind of mess around with the different configurations in your company's environment. So moving on to Q&A, thank you so much for listening today. Yes. That's a really good question. I would not say, I didn't find anything that was super specific to Teams phishing when I was doing this research. I did find research based on like the misconfigured webhooks, so that's all I really found, and then I used that to conduct this engagement. Yeah, so with the open source tool that I used, it did give me the different clicks. When I first started, I didn't really get too many, which told me that the developers weren't like really looking at every single notification. So that's what got me to start introducing misspellings or to make it look more suspicious. And then as soon as they detected it, there was like tons of feedback into the channel. So they weren't clicking the link, but they were actually telling each other like, hey, this is what's going on. This is the certificate that I'm seeing. So it's really cool to see the security awareness of the team come into play and them communicating together to spot this phish and then seeing how they reported it to us, knowing that this was a first-time engagement. Yeah.
What made you go down that rabbit hole of like going through Teams and looking for holes to poke into?
Yeah, good question. So I was given the task to create a red team engagement, and I was told about the webhooks, so that was the information I was given. I was given a little bit of help from my team, but overall it was just, here's something we heard about, and what can we do about it, so.
I was curious, and as you were doing the engagement, so there's misconfiguration here or default configuration, and you already have user credentials. Did you see any other place where the webhooks were leaked to where maybe an attacker who just has access to maybe network traffic could find these webhooks and do this? Or is it really kind of you have to have a privileged account and misconfiguration together?
For this instance, I did need to have credentials to access Teams, but it did not have to be a privileged account. I just could be any user. But that's a good future test.
Just a quick question about the mitigation. Is the misconfiguration global or per webhook?
That's a good question. I believe it's per organization, so the organization can decide who can view whatever in each channel. So I'm not 100% sure about this, but it could be like the person who configured the webhook is the only person who's able to view it versus everyone who is in the organization.
Do you have any tools for doing statistical analysis with this? Like, I've never used GoFish before, so I'm not as familiar with it, but I'm wondering like how you're able to analyze the data to like determine, success from failure, who clicks, and maybe what reasons, and how you get the feedback from your users.
Yeah, I love this question. So in GoFish, it generates a CSV file. So what I did is I actually wrote a short Python script to do it for me. So there is a functionality within GoFish that kind of shows you, there's like in the UI where you can see, but I wanted to process my own data, so I wrote a Python script and I used like pandas or something, but it was pretty, like 10 lines or so. So it's pretty simple.
So the configuration you're talking about sounded like somebody had taken privileged account information or insider threat. The one I'm kind of curious about is, did you do any testing with people who have access to a Teams meeting, because it does create a channel, who are outside the company? And I'm thinking, like, I've done Teams meetings for interviews before and having the ability to see that information.
I also really love that question. That is something I'm doing in my research right now to see. So I am not sure, but it's something that I am looking at currently right now. So yeah. Cool. Well, thank you.